Hi everyone, welcome to this video. In this video, we will be covering the serverless architecture or the serverless model. This video is mainly divided into four main sections. The first thing that we'll cover is the what is serverless. Then we'll see the evolution of serverless, like how we moved from physical servers to the serverless state. Then there are certain advantages of the serverless, and that will help you in deciding whether you can go for serverless or the server-based approach. Finally, there are some challenges also associated with serverless, and these challenges will help you in deciding whether for a particular use case you should go for serverless or not. So without wasting much time, let's start the video. So the first thing that we will be covering is what is serverless architecture. So in serverless architecture, the underlying infrastructure is provided by the cloud provider itself. You need not to worry about that because the provisioning, let's say configuration, management, everything is done by the cloud provider. The underlying infrastructure will automatically scale in, scale out based on the workload. If there is a heavy workload, the infrastructure will scale out to meet the requirement, and in case of lesser workload, it will scale in to meet the decreased demand so that resources are not wasted. It also takes care of the high availability. That means in case some of the underlying infrastructure goes down or it is impacted, but it will not have any impact on your application because the cloud provider takes care of the high availability. So with serverless architecture, the only thing that you need to focus on writing your code. So you can focus on writing your code without having to deal with the underlying infrastructure such as servers, operating system, or the runtime environment. All these things will be provided by the cloud provider itself. So the next thing that we'll see the evolution of serverless, like how we evolved from physical servers to the serverless. So before I move to that thing, if you are liking this content, then do press the like button and subscribe to this channel. So if we talk of the evolution, like how we evolved from physical servers to the serverless state, in case of physical servers, there are multiple steps involved in order to run your application. Like the first thing that you need to do is the procurement. You need to procure the hardware. Then you need to do the network cabling. You need to set your hardware inside your data center with all the cables and routers and switches. Then you need to do the configuration and installation of OS. And then finally, you can run your applications on top of it. So there are multiple steps involved in it. And this is a time-taking process because the procurement of the hardware itself takes time, and then all these things also take their own time. But then we move to virtual machines. So with virtual machine, that means you can create multiple VMs onto the same physical box. So let's say this is my VM and this is my physical box. So you can create multiple VMs on the same physical server. So that decreases the time because you do not have to do the procurement every time you want to create a server. But still you need to do the OS installation and configuration, and then you need to configure your applications on top of it. And then there is some further enhancement happen, and we are talking about containers. So with containers, now let's say this is my virtual machine. Here you can run multiple Docker containers inside your same VM. So it further reduced the time because now you do not need to create multiple VMs. Now within the single VM, you can run your Docker containers with the server software that is required. Suppose you want to run some Linux box, then you can run the container as per your requirement, and then you can configure your applications inside the container. So this further reduces the overall time for the application installation. But now we are talking about the serverless. So with serverless, the thing that we were doing with Docker container is not required. The only thing that you need to worry about is application. So now you can focus on writing your application code because the underlying infrastructure is taken care by the cloud provider. That means provisioning, management, scaling, high availability, everything is taken care by the cloud provider. So you just focus on writing your code. So this is how we evolved from the physical servers to the serverless. So let's move to the next topic, that is advantages of the serverless. This will help you in deciding whether the serverless model is good for your application or not, whether you should opt for serverless or the server-based approach. There are multiple advantages associated with serverless computing. The first thing that I like to cover is that with serverless computing, you need not to manage the underlying infra. That means no server management, and developers can focus on writing the code itself. And rest of the things such as server management, provisioning, maintenance, everything is taken care by the cloud provider itself. Next thing is adapt at scale. That means the underlying infrastructure can scale in or scale out depending upon the requirement. So it can scale out if there is a heavy demand, or it will scale in if the demand decreases. So these actions will occur automatically and are taken care by the cloud provider. Again, we do not need to worry about all these things, like in case the application workload increases, whether my infrastructure will scale out or not, whether we are able to meet the required demand or not. So all these things are totally taken care by the cloud provider. Next thing is pay as you go model. So serverless can be a point of huge cost saving as well, because you are paying only for the time that you are using it or your programs or code is running. So this is what is pay as you go model. So you are built based on the actual resources consumed during the execution rather than paying for the pre-allocated infrastructure. Let's say you are running some Lambda functions. So you will be paid for the time your function is running, as compared to server based environment where you have to pay for the servers 24 cross 7 even if your applications are running or not. So this is a huge advantage of serverless pay as you go model. So next thing or the advantage I like to cover is the high availability, but I'll go a step back and I'll cover what happens in the traditional or server based approach. Suppose we are running our application on a server, and if that server goes down, then our application is also down. So we have to plan our underlying infra in such a way that it is high available. That means if a couple of servers goes down, then other servers should be running that can take care of the application. So that is what high availability is. So that means we have to keep running some additional servers all the time just to make our application high available. But with serverless computing, this high availability is again taken care by your cloud provider. So you run your application will be available even if some of the underlying infrastructure goes down, because those things are not at all visible to us. So what we are focusing on our application, our code, and rest of the things like high availability or scaling, everything is taken care by the cloud provider itself. Next advantage is quick deployment or quick turnaround. So I just spoke about the earlier setup where we used to have physical server or other VMs or containers. There we have to create our underlying infra up to an extent. Even with physical servers, it takes a lot of time because we have to go through procurement, configuration, installation, and then application. But with serverless, the underlying infra is taken care by the cloud provider, so you can just focus on your application. Suppose there are some bug fixes, then you can focus on updating your code and deploy it without worrying about the infra. So you can quickly release your new features as well. So with these advantages, there are some challenges also that are associated with serverless. So we need to understand those as well while deciding the correct model for our application. So the first thing is no visibility for underlying infra. So this is a benefit. We were speaking about it earlier that we do not need to worry about infra, but this can be a challenge as well. So in some scenarios, your application requires specific environmental configuration, but with serverless, there is no visibility for that. So this can be an issue as well. Additionally, with serverless, let's say, take example of Lambda function. So you can run Lambda for maximum of 15 minutes. So this can be a challenge if your application needs more runtime. thing is there can be certain performance issue as well with serverless model, because here we are deploying a lot of services. Let's say we have deployed a lot of serverless components starting with databases or lambda functions or storage. So if we have a lot of component, then there can be some latency because there are a lot of components talking to each other. So sometimes this can lead to performance issues as well. So this can be another challenge. So we need to decide for our application like what is best, whether it is serverless or server-based approach. Another challenge can be monitoring and debugging. So one of the reasons that I just spoke about, if there are multiple components talking to each other, then we need to be very cautious like which component is exactly causing the issue, and we have to monitor each component. Additionally, in case of any issue, it is very difficult to replicate the serverless environment in order to figure out what is causing the issue. Also, debugging becomes very complicated because we do not have the visibility on the underlying architecture. Additionally, due to distributed nature, it is very difficult to debug the application. Next thing is vendor locking. With serverless approach, usually a vendor provides all your backend services for an application. So this leads to a lot of dependency on that vendor. So in case we want to switch our serverless application to some other vendor, then it becomes very difficult for us to move our application due to the vendor locking. Finally, there is another important thing that we need to consider for serverless is resource limit. Sometimes serverless model is not suited for your heavy workload or the application that needs high performance computing because of the resources limit that is imposed by your cloud provider. So with serverless, your application can scale up to a certain limit only that is imposed by a cloud provider. But in case your application needs more resources, then it will be an issue. In some cases, it is cheaper for your application to be on the server-based approach. Let's say your application requires high performance computing, then you can do some reserved instances. So that will be a huge cost saving. So this is what I wanted to cover in terms of challenges. So thanks for watching this video and have a nice day.